Welcome back to the Unity Crash Course. Let's take a look at UI today. I will start with, I think the basic UI element is a button that you can press. Let's use this graphic here. And you can see that I have set this graphic to be a sprite. And that's the same thing you'll use for 2D graphics and also for the UI. You see that says that in there. So let's make a pressable button. If you just drag it into the scene, you don't get a UI element. You get what's called a sprite renderer. That's an object that moves around in game space. The UI is different in that it lives in screen space. Or in Unity, what we'll have is something called canvas, and so it'll be in canvas space. So let's get rid of that button sprite, and instead we'll right click and UI, create a button. All right, so that gives us the default button right there, but I said I wanted to put this image on it. So how do I do that? I'll select my button and then just drag that on there. Now, when I created that, I only asked for a button, but I got a canvas and an event system along with the button. These are components of the UI system. The Unity UI system requires a canvas and an event system. If you don't have one yet, when you create any UI element, it will automatically add one to your scene. Once you already have it, you can just add new UI elements to it. So let's add another button. Okay, so you can add more and it won't keep piling up extra canvases. So let's take a look at that canvas. This canvas has on it some things, a raycaster and this screen space overlay, but the thing of interest here is the canvas scaler. The canvas scaler comes in and it defaults to constant pixel size. What are we talking about here? Let's go to the game screen, and I think you'll see what I mean if I just do this. Depending on the aspect ratio and the resolution of the screen, you get different looks because that button is just sort of staying there and letting me scale the screen around. And that isn't what we want for a UI. In mobile games, the aspect ratio of the screen can vary a lot from one device to another, and of course the screen resolution can vary as well. So what we want is our UI to scale with the screen. So we'll just go down here, canvas scaler, scale with screen size. When I set the width of the screen, you can see the button scales up and down. If I change it to height, then it won't react to width, instead it will react to height. What I usually do to start off is I'm gonna set it with 50-50, so it kind of reacts to an average of width and height. It reacts to both, and that's a good starting point. The real trick with UI elements is to get them to hold in the right position for all kinds of different aspect ratios. So for example, this button here, let's imagine I want that button to be in the top left corner of the screen. UI elements have, instead of a regular transform, they have a rect transform or rectangle transform, and those have the special property of being anchored to something. This one is anchored to the center of the screen, 0.5, 0.5. Let's anchor the button to the top left corner. That is 0 on the X is the left corner, and 1 on the Y is the top corner. And you can see a little indicator here of where we've anchored it, but I've lost my button, and you can see that's because I've got an offset on that. Let's just set that to 0, 0 offset, and now the button is anchored to the top left. Let's see that in game view. It is now anchored. Now what does that mean? It means that when I scale the screen, no matter what aspect ratio, no matter what resolution, that button will stay in the top left corner. Let's see that. I'm scaling it, and it's staying in the top left corner. Okay, well that's good, except I can't see my button. I'm gonna want it offset in on the screen. The first thing I'll point you to is the pivot. The pivot for the object is set to the middle of the object. I want the I want the thing to be in the top left corner of the screen, so I'm going to move the pivot to the top left of the button. So now the top left corner is anchored to the top left corner of the screen. Let's see that in game view, and that's closer to what I want, but maybe I don't want it in exactly the corner. Let's offset it a little bit so we can push it to the right. Let's push it to the right 32 pixels, and let's push it down, oops, wrong way, down 32 pixels. And now let's see what that looks like when I change the resolution and the aspect ratio. So that's anchoring. That's how we'll lay out a user interface. The user interface is hierarchical, meaning the button has a text element on it, and that text element is a child of the button. And I can change what it says here. I don't know, press me. And you can see that it is also anchored. In this case, we're seeing the other example of how to anchor. You can anchor the minimum and the maximum as opposed to just a single point. So we have set up our text to fill the rectangle, goes from a minimum of 0, 0 to a maximum of 1, 1. That fills the entire rectangle of its parent object. And in this case, the parent object is the button. So that means when I change the size of the button, let's make the button taller. When I change the size of the button, I have also changed automatically the size of the text to match, because the text is set up to just fill exactly that rectangle. Let's see an example of using like a hierarchical layout to put like a frame and then several objects inside that frame using this technique. So I'm going to come here, let's just create a good old UI image, and I'm going to put my frame sprite on that image. Okay, it is anchored to the center of the screen. Let's make it a little bigger. Let's make it, I don't know, 400 by 300. So, all right, let's see what that looks like in screen mode. And it's anchored to the center, so it stays centered. And because I have the scaling turned on, it's going to kind of scale, make it pretty resilient to different aspect ratios. Okay, that's pretty good. I'm happy with that. Let's put some things into that frame. Let's put a piece of text. So I'm going to right click on here because I want to create a child. And I'll just put a text element here, and I'll put frame title on that. Now, this frame title, I want to anchor to the top of the frame. Let's do that. So I want the top center. Center, top. So there you go. But let's pull it down a little bit. So we'll offset minus 32. And you can also, I'm typing in numbers. You can also just use this. And you can see that's affecting that same number I was just typing. So adjust it till you like it. Let's put a couple of buttons inside the frame. Let's put some of these square buttons in there. So I'm going to add a UI. Let's add a button. And let's put this, let's put the green button. Green button. And the green button originally was 80 by 79. So let's make it, it should be about square. Let's make it square. Ooh, that's too big. Let's make it 80 by 80. 80 by 79, why not, right? That's how big it was. And where do we want to anchor it? Let's say we're going to make two buttons center bottom, like so. Let's make a red button and a green button. Let me just duplicate that one and then put the red button on this other one. Let's say we want something that looks kind of like that, but I want them anchored there on the bottom. So I should do that first. Let's anchor them to the bottom. That's Y is 0, 0, and the pivot for those should be the bottoms. And then the offset, let's offset them up to where I like. These are anchored to the center, although really I want the pivot, I'm going to say I want the pivot for the anchor point to be the bottom right corner for this one. and the bottom left corner for that one. All right, and then let's adjust them till I think they look about right. Boom, boom, boom. Cool. Now, why is that useful? Well, that's useful is if I adjust the size of the frame, they will stay anchored there. So let's make the frame taller. And so now they're staying anchored to the bottom edge of the frame. Instead of anchoring them to the middle, maybe I actually would want to say that these are spaced, sort of evenly. So maybe this should be positioned at 0.33. Let's say, put the center of it at 0.33. Now let's put this one's center at 0.66. Oops. 66. Now maybe we want to space them out that way. Now they're anchored to a position, a third of the way through and a third of the way through the frame. So that's the crash course of UI layout. Use images, use text elements, use buttons. Buttons are actually made of images and text elements nested. Nest your things and anchor everything. The key is to get into game mode, and you can use play in editor mode and adjust the screen size in real time to verify that your UI is resilient to a multitude of different aspect ratios. And push it to the extreme. Make sure that your UI is going to work in whatever aspect ratio the user might be playing on. And that's how you do it. Just do it like that. Next, let's take a look at how to hook up some code to these.